Hi, hello everyone, and welcome to our demo of QuerySurge for DevOps session. My name is Michael Calabrese. I'll be joined today with Chris Thompson, and we'll take you through a little bit of the DevOps setup for our QuerySurge tool. My name is Michael Calabrese. I joined RTTS back in 2009 as a test engineer. Since then, I have about now a decade worth, or over a decade worth of experience in the functional data validation and ETL testing space. I've worked for many different clients across many verticals, and I'm currently helping QuerySurge clients and prospects in their implementations of the tool all around the world. And I am joined by Chris.
Thanks, Mike. My name is Chris Thompson. I'm a military veteran with 5 years of military service in the U.S. Navy. I flew around in a plane called the P-3 Orion, the Sub Hunter. I have a bachelor's of science degree in computer science from the University of Delaware. I've done successful implementations on QA projects in the data space for over 15 years. I'm employed for RTTS for the past 21 years, and I started with RTTS as an entry-level test engineer just coming out of college. Worked in numerous fields, including pharmaceutical, utilities, and retail. Back to you, Mike.
All right, thanks, Chris. All right, so we're going to be talking about DevOps today, but first we'll go over our problem statement here. As you'll see on many of the sessions today, there are lots of data coming from lots of different sources, lots of systems all coming together through various ETL legs. And why is that important? Well, this data that's being ingested by all these companies are going to be used to make these critical business decisions, either to support applications and information to end users, or maybe for C-level suite executives to make decisions off of their business intelligence reports that could have financial impacts on the state of the company. So how do we test all this data? How is the testing landscape out in the world today? What we find is that the majority of companies are at these lower three levels. So they're either doing some sort of data sampling or maybe pulling information into Excel where they're testing a subset of their data, utilizing the possibility of data compares with minus queries. Source minus target, target minus source, trying to identify any of those differences, and either some form of homegrown solution that they've developed. Where most companies would like to get to is a higher maturity level of being able to test your data using an automated solution like QuerySurge, and then ultimately, where the trend is happening now is that top level of maturity where that automated solution is integrated into your DevOps solutions, your pipelines, so that everything together is running seamlessly from code development to deployment to testing and across that landscape of that continuous integration, continuous deployment stack.
So, Mike, if we have daily incrementals in our data warehouse, we're able to use DevOps to automatically kick off the QuerySurge tool to be able to execute the test.
Absolutely.
Upon completion of the ETL process?
Yeah, and that's the idea. And that's what we'll talk about today, and hopefully give you some techniques if you are experienced with the tool to be able to use it. And even if you're not experienced with the tool, hopefully to give you some insight to help you get to that higher level of the data maturity model. So that's certainly something that we'll talk about as we go through the demo today, Chris.
Excellent.
So just some basics first to cover how QuerySurge works if you haven't seen it before. QuerySurge is an automated data validation tool that will take 2 points, any 2 points really, of source and target, ingest that information into QuerySurge, and then can perform an analysis to identify any differences between your source and your target data sets. QuerySurge has the ability then to provide data validation analytics on those results, and we'll see in just a short moment how that all works together. So normal data process you may have, or a data environment, you may see various source systems coming together maybe into a big data lake that then moves over to a data warehouse, then maybe a data mart, and finally, most of the time ending up in a business intelligence report where those critical decisions are going to be made. So each point where data is being moved from, let's say, a source to the data lake, that's what we consider an ETL leg. And there are usually some mappings associated with that data movement. If you looked and watched Chris's session earlier on how to create a project plan, he discusses in detail the mapping requirements and documents that go along with it. We consider each of these as a testing point where we can point QuerySurge at to be able to validate that that data moves as it is expecting based on those mapping requirements. The QuerySurge environment, how QuerySurge is set up and configured. QuerySurge is a Web 2.0 based application. It is backended in MySQL with a Tomcat app server. There are several components which we call agents, and their main responsibility is to go out and execute the tests, fetch the data from the various data sources. QuerySurge users can access the tool via their favorite web browser, and it installs in most environment setups. And the main point here is that QuerySurge uses JDBC, which allows you to connect to most any of the data stores that are out there in the marketplace today. And here you see a partial list of everything that QuerySurge can connect to, most of which our customers and clients are using. And I do have experience with a number of the names that are on this list to be able to validate, because the landscape is so wide out there today. I mean, Chris, how many different data sources do you see on these projects that we're working on?
Dozens.
Yeah,
dozens.
So moving on now to what our main topic is going to be today is QuerySurge and how QuerySurge can work within your DevOps process. So QuerySurge itself comes with a RESTful API built into the tool. There's over 60 plus calls growing with each release to be able to go in and do a lot of the things that you may want or are capable of doing in the UI. You can do programmatically. And that works really well with being able to integrate with the different pipelines that you may have on your system and with the various technologies that you may have in place. The RESTful API itself really opens up the possibilities to integrate with a whole range of different tools. And that's what we'll be taking a look at today. And QuerySurge has built in it a Swagger documentation, which is an open source interface for describing RESTful APIs. So the APIs of QuerySurge, the documentation for it is actually built into the tool. And we'll go through this in detail today. The ultimate really end goal maybe would be something like you see here where you have a DevOps pipeline set up. You have maybe some source systems coming in, some ETL jobs going on, and you're wanting to use QuerySurge to be able to validate that. And you can do that here with the QuerySurge API. You can also, and we'll see at the tail end here, have some integrations with maybe the test management tools or defect tracking software such as Jira using our webhooks connectivity capabilities. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to pull up a demo environment for QuerySurge. This should look familiar to you, Chris.
Way too familiar. Way too familiar.
So we're going to go ahead and start by logging in. And what I'm going to do today is I have this DevOps sample project. This DevOps sample project, we're going to exclusively use for this case the tutorial data. So anyone that downloads QuerySurge from our website, it's a free trial. You do have access to this tutorial documentation. It will walk you through a specific scenario about two fictitious companies, XMart and ZCity, and go through some basics of how to data test. And it comes with
just like to point out, Mike, that this tutorial is excellent. Not only because I created it, but it really is.
I really think so as well. I mean, getting started with QuerySurge, this is one of the best ways to do it. It does look pretty basic, but it's what you want to understand the concepts of testing. You don't want some overly complicated data structure when you're trying to understand the processes and the functionality around the tool. So I'm going to have to agree with you, Chris. And just so you know, Chris did have a big hand in creating this tutorial document, so that's why he likes it so much.
I think you cleaned it up and reviewed it for me.
May have one or two changes. So the main point here is the data that we'll see today. It's available for you to try out. Maybe you can replicate some of the calls that I'll do in the demo today and maybe get something out of it. So that's the hope here. We can see that we have our mapping document here. It's going to lay out how data is going to transform from the source system to the target system. And what we'll see in the tool actually is that when you load the tutorial data in, it comes preloaded with several different query pairs already created for you. So it's a good way to understand these basic concepts of what we'll be looking to do. So I'll open up, let's see, what's a good one? Chris, eCity order ID. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah. So what we have here is basic query pair. We have our source side, our target side. And I just want to go over the basic functionality just so we can get an idea once we dive into the API, how you can then relate that back to what's expected of the test. So we have our source side going against our zCity source. Our target is our data warehouse here. And we do have this test is basically a row count test. So it's checking to make sure you see we have one target and one source row coming back, but that row is going to be a count of the actual rows in our table here, that sales table specifically. So basically this test is to verify that data has moved over. We have all our records there, which is it's a basic test, but we may want to get a little bit more in depth because if we take a look, and now I'm going to come over to our Squirrel client to just get a look into this database. So if I come over to zCity and I do, let's say, select all from sales, and Squirrel is a nice open source technology. Let's see here. So we want to be going against the sale, not sales. So very important when we're writing queries that were accurate.
You know how syntax is.
Exactly. So what we can see here is we have the limit turned on. So if we do the enabling or the disabling of limits, we'll get the full suite of tables here. And there we go. That's our count there, 6,919. Now, it's not just a set of records here, but it's records and fields with data. So our next example that we'll take a look at is going to test the status field that's part of this table. And that status field gets transformed as it moves over to the data warehouse. And what we can see in these particular results is that, the record counts are the same, but we have a specific field that we're testing, and that field is different on our source and our target. And QuerySurge is able to identify that to us. So would you say this is a problem, Chris?
Absolutely. It looks like there's a translation problem between the source and the target.
Yeah, I would say so too. So a good indication then that something has gone wrong in ETL code. Maybe we want to report this out to our developers. Maybe bring this back to the business to make sure that the rule or the mapping has been defined correctly and take it from there. But just wanted to highlight the basic functionality and how QuerySurge works within the query pairs itself.
So we'll look good for finding it.
Yes.
But the developers won't look so good.
Well,
for creating.
No, they may be a little bit upset, or maybe they'll be happy because we found it in our QA environment and not in production.
That's a good point, Mike.
That's right.
Yeah. Work as a team.
That's it. Collaboration is key. So these design time runs, the runs that we've been looking at, they're nice when you're developing the query pair. They're good for your one-off ad hoc runs. When it comes time to run your more formal tests, run, let's say, your regression suite, that's when you want to come over to our what we have here is our test suite section in our scheduling module. So a test suite is really a collection of query pairs. So similar query pairs you can see in the example I have here. I'm testing a number of different fields in the zCity database, all going against our DW target. We'll want to, let's say, save that and make sure that we're going to be validating the data as it moves across each of these systems. So now I could certainly click Run Now. I can do this manually from the UI here, but since we're talking about DevOps, let's have some fun with the QuerySurge API and kick this off using our Swagger documentation that I talked about earlier. So the neat thing about QuerySurge is that every QuerySurge instance, if I were to just take our URL here and type in rest-docs or rest-docs at the end, that's going to bring up our Swagger documentation. And in here, we can see all of the available API calls that we can make into QuerySurge. And they're broken out by section here. The one we'll probably want to take a look at first to kick off that test suite is going to be execute suite here. But before we do that, we need to authenticate with the QuerySurge server. So we do have our authentication login call here. And now the great thing about Swagger is this is an interactive documentation. So I can click try it out. And here I am. I'm given an edit screen here, and I'm going to type in our demo username for which we have set up in this demo environment, and I'm going to click execute. That's actually going to fire an API call against QuerySurge. If everything works out good, I'm going to get a nice response code here. I'm going to go ahead and download this just so we have it for reference, because we'll be using this to make additional calls, as this will be our authentication token. So anytime you're going to be using the QuerySurge API, you'll want to start with this call, because it's the way that you can access all the other calls. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So basically, you need to be able to log in to get the session ID to be able to interact with QuerySurge from outside QuerySurge.
That's exactly right.
Just like you were logging in through the front end.
Yeah,
in
there you go.
Fashion.
So now that I have the authentication token, I can come over to my execute suite option here. And you'll see I'm going to be asked for a little bit more information. We'll click that try it out button again, and we'll put in an authentication token, because that's what we know. Then the first piece of information to make this execution call is our project ID. So we are working within project 15 within QuerySurge. That's the DevOps demo that I have set up. Our suite ID that we'll want to execute. Let's come on back here and we'll see, okay, we have ID 1. That's the one we're going to want to execute in here. So if I come back to the documentation, we'll say ID 1. We'll want to give the scenario a name. You got a good name, Chris?
Chris?
Let's call it Chris's scenario.
Yeah.
There we go.
All right, cool.
Okay, cool.
I like it.
There you go. Now, there's also some other options here where you can set tags. Tags, we're going to leave this false, but tags are a nice way within QuerySurge, if you look either at the query pair or the test suite level, where you can tag in certain assets, tags to certain assets. So if I had all my ZCity tests and I wanted to search them within QuerySurge, I can search on that ZCity tag. I feel like that's a popular feature you see now in some of the different testing tools out there. I guess Azure DevOps comes to mind, some of the others as well. But we're going to leave this blank. And we're going to want to append the time, just so we have a timestamp when we actually run this. We can then, if we're looking historically back at these results, understand when the scenario was run at a glance when looking in the run dashboard. So I think we're good. Should we press execute?
I think so.
All right.
I think we should.
And there we go. So we've got an execution. The response back for this particular call is going to be a GUID ID for the scenario. That'll be important later, as we'll see. But let's come over to QuerySurge and check if that Chris scenario has started. And well, would you look at that? There it goes. So currently it is scheduled right now, and now it's kicking off via the magic of the API.
That's the coolest scenario you've ever executed, Mike.
I'm sure it is, Chris. So one of the other cool things we can do with the GUID ID is if we wanted to get that high-level result of the scenario to see what state it is in, we can come over here into our status option, and we can retrieve the execution status of our scenario. So all we'll need is that GUID ID for the scenario. We'll need our authentication token, and we'll need the project ID, which is 15. So we can go ahead and click execute on. Oh, did I do quotes? Yes, I did.
Yeah, no quotes.
No quotes. All right. So the status is currently running as it currently is. And then I'll click this again. And you can see how it's changed, because if I look in QuerySurge, it probably just wrapped up executing, and we do have a failure. So if I were to open this up in QuerySurge, we can see majority of the query pairs passed, but we do have those failures in here. And just like you can do in the design time run, you can see the source target information and those different failures here. So it looks like, do we have a failure here, Chris?
I think we do. But it doesn't look like we do. Let's see, source ID 010005 and target.
I think I know what's wrong here.
I don't know. It looks the same, Mike. I think.
So there's a white space in here. So this is the first name, last name split. So we got an extra white space. QuerySurge captures really any and all characters that are going to be part of that field set. So you can see, not by the eye, but if you use this show white space, you're able to then see that white space value that is causing the failure in the difference.
Sounds like
here.
Somebody forgot to use trim.
Yeah. Always be sure to trim. All right. So that's just some basic information. And the nice thing about this is all of those calls that I've just executed, they're all part of the base API. And that means that any instance of QuerySurge can make those calls. So if you were to go download a 15-day trial, you'll be able to interact with those specific authentication, execute suite, and get status calls. We'll also talk about the snippet calls. So let me talk about the snippets for a little bit, which is also part of the API. If I have, let's say, let me pick another scenario here. I think I know which one I want to do. I thought I knew which one. Now I know which one. All right. So I'm going to pull up another query pair here. This one is testing the date a customer has joined this Z City program here. So if we take a look at the results, we basically have a customer ID or a source ID and the date that they've joined. So we can see a list of different historical dates in here. And if we can, for a second, imagine that part of my testing scenario is not to test all the dates in the database, but I want to narrow the scope to a particular set of dates. So this happens a lot, especially when you're dealing with maybe financial companies where you want to look at specific quarters, or even retail companies for that matter, or really any business. There's a focus on quarter, there's a focus on past year, things like that. And given the amount of data that's out there, this usually is the case where you'll want to narrow the scope into focusing on specific dates.
So if it was Walmart, I wouldn't want to test all their orders from the beginning of time.
No, I don't think you would want to.
It would just take way too long.
Yes. So in that case, what I've done here is I've expanded out the SQL statement. I've cheated a little bit because I've planned ahead. And I have two SQL statements here that are going to slightly modify our query pair. Now, before we get into what this is, we'll talk about what we're trying to do here. As we mentioned, that we wanted to filter or trim on a specific date. So instead of getting everything, let's say I want to get things for the first half of January. So if I wanted to do that, I can put in here the specific dates, and that will filter out the dates for me if I get my quotes right. Now, if my requirements are to test the first half of January, the second half of January, and the beginning of February, I can certainly create 3 different query pairs to be able to do that. Or I can use QuerySurge's reusable snippet function, which is essentially a way to parameterize your query pair. So in order to do that, I can come over here, I can select the text that I want to snippetize or parameterize, and we'll give it a name. We'll call it start date. And for this portion of the filter, we'll give it a name. We'll call it end date. You think that's a good name, Chris?
No, I don't think it's a very good name. I think it should be final date.
Final date.
Wait, that doesn't make sense. No, it's a good name.
End date's a good name.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll use that on both the source and the target side. So snippets can be used amongst multiple query pairs on either side. The only real requirement is that when the snippets themselves are all resolved and you run your query pair, that you have a valid SQL statement in there. So now that I've created these, let's go ahead and save this query pair. And let's see here. If I go to the reusable query snippets, we have 2 snippets created. I can certainly go in here, click run test, come back, update the snippets, click run test again. But since we're using the API, why don't we do something programmatically to, let's say, cycle through those dates? Sound like a good idea?
I like that idea. So we can do the first quarter and then do this, or the first half of the month, do the second half of the month, third, fourth, so on.
Exactly. And now to be able to do that, we'll take a look first at this call here, which is going to be our update snippet call. So let's just take a look at our snippet section. And look at that. We have a snippet call or an API call that we can update our snippet with. And all we'll need to do for that, header-wise, is be able to put our project ID, our authentication token, and the ID of the snippet we want to look up. And in here, which is a little bit different than the other two calls that we've made here. We're going to have some specifics to put in the request body. So we're going to want to make sure that we define the name of the snippet, the path of the snippet, which in this case is at the root level, so it would be request reusable query snippets, and then the text, which is going to be what we want to change that snippet to. So we know we have, what did I call it? End date?
Start date and end date.
Not final date?
No, was it final? No, it was. We decided on end date.
Yeah.
In the end.
All right, cool. So just to see how this would work, we can say, Chris's scenario. So let's update it to Chris's snippet.
Yeah, that's better name. I like that.
And then I was here in the description. And again, with the asset tags, we're not going to put any on the snippet, but that's always an option. So within the snippet itself, these have IDs similar to the suite ID. We have 6 and 7. So we can come over here. Let's update, since end date is 7, I believe, right? Let's update snippet 7. And we also need our authentication token, don't we, Chris?
Absolutely. Without that, nothing will work.
That's right. And project ID is 15. So those we're familiar with. These are new. Let's go ahead and fire this off and see what we get back. So it looks like we got a 204 code back. That's a good indication that the snippet was updated. You can see that response code listed out here. If I were to get an error, the specific errors for each of the calls that you make are listed here. So if I didn't have that authentication token, Chris, it's a good chance I'll get that 401 error, right?
Yeah, it's the one I get all the time because I always forget the token ID.
So let's check if it actually worked. Let's come into our end date. And there we go. It says Chris's snippet.
That's a cool name. I like it.
All right. So now that we understand the values we'll need to pass in, let's write some code to be able to cycle through them. And what we have here is just a CSV file that's going to have the values that I want to input into our snippet and then cycle through. So we're going to take a combination of all the different calls that we've made so far, and put them all together into a script that will cycle through, update the snippets, and then execute the tests. I have just a very basic patch file here that's using curl, which is a tool that you'll be able to make these requests on. So if I were to open up a command line, I put a curl command in here, that would take the same action as me clicking execute from the Swagger documentation. We'll just need to make some key updates here for our latest values. So we have our authentication token and our suite ID, which if we come over to our QuerySurge instance, I have a snippet suite created, but I didn't add that query pair in there yet. So let's go ahead and add that query pair. And that is ID 73. So what we'll do now is we'll bring up a command line to execute this batch file. I'll just navigate to the location of the file. And we can then call this batch file to be able to run. And what it's going to do is we'll see that it's going to report back on the status, just as we did with the other call here. It's currently not run, but we should see it execute shortly. If we come over now to our QuerySurge run dashboard, which is where all these results are, we'll do a little refresh. And we can see then our snippets API scripts are executing. Let's take a look at the first result here. And if we take a look at the source and the target, we're aligning with what we are driving this with, which is the beginning of January to the middle of January. We can see that has updated both our source and target queries. And it continues on and creates new test suites as it loops through each of these. So we can see that we have now the second half of the month. And then as this final one is executing, we should see in here, let's say, the end of January to the middle of February. So just a simple example of a way that you can utilize the API to do some data-driven tests and manipulate your results here to target in based on your testing requirements so that you don't have to test the whole set, but maybe a targeted set, and maybe updates as they come in. So you can imagine that you may have some incremental tests that get updated daily. You can create an API script to update a snippet in QuerySurge so that you're testing new data as it comes in each day, just as an example.
Mike, you might be also Walmart,
Mm-hmm.
right? And have 2.5 or more petabytes of data, and you want to do a data migration. Say they're doing a data migration, and to test that field would just be use so much processing power that it wouldn't be feasible to do it in one go. You could just break it up into months, years, whatever you needed to do to make sure you test all the data.
Absolutely. And instead of having to create specific query pairs for each date range or each whatever filter you want, you can break it out programmatically, and you can schedule your runs by manipulating those snippets and breaking up your tests that way. So that's a great point, Chris.
Very cool.
Yeah. And now, I mean, I've used some pretty basic calls here. I've used curl, and you can actually see in the REST documentation, it's going to give you the actual curl command that you can use within here. But really, when we're talking about RESTful APIs, there are so many applications that in languages that can take advantage of them. Postman, for example, is great for API testing. And since QuerySurge is built with the open API specs, you can actually come in here, get the open API JSON, and I can load that into Postman. And once I do that, I'll have access to all of the QuerySurge API calls. And one of the advantages of here, and the reason I'm doing this, is to show you the different technologies that can be implemented by utilizing RESTful APIs. So if I were to just pick one, let's say, that we have in here, Postman has a nice little feature where you can see on the side the different coding languages that you can use to call into the QuerySurge RESTful API. So whether you're using the simple curl command as I just was, if you're into Java or JavaScript, all Python, for example, all are ways where you can access and use the sort of RESTful standard to be able to make those different calls in the system. Pretty cool, right?
Absolutely. So how do I get up to speed with the API?
Well, like I was mentioning, the API itself is embedded into the QuerySurge application.
Okay.
So if I had a question about any of these different calls, let's say I want to execute a list of suites. There's information here, but there's also, if you come down into the, let's say here for the one I have executed, the different schema details, you can see the differences in what the codes that you're expecting back for. And if I were to, let's say, come into the query pair update, for example, I can click on schema, and each of the information that's going to be in the body, it's going to tell me exactly what I need to know about what I need to update with QuerySurge. So before diving into the API, it's always a good idea to understand the tool and how it functions itself. I'm sure, as you know, Chris, there is a great knowledge base for QuerySurge. And if you're on the full Test Guild session today, I know Eric has done a great overview of the QuerySurge portal, which has numerous training courses to help you get up to speed on the tool. So in talking about, let's say, this basic example and maybe some of the different languages that you can use, let's take a look at maybe a more involved scenario. For this, we're going to actually go out and beyond our base API, and we're going to use some of the additional calls in here that come with the QuerySurge DevOps for Data add-on. So that is licensed separately from the base API, but certainly anyone that's interested in trying it out or doing a POC where you want to use the base API, that's something we do make available on a POC trial basis. Now, the call that we're going to be taking a look at is going to be under the let's see, I believe it's under the suite update level. So let me close these down so we can get a better view. So we're going to actually take a look at this suite update call. So this is a little bit more involved with the DevOps for Data API. It's a lot more powerful. You can make more extensive updates. So if I wanted to update a suite, and one of the reasons we want to maybe do that is maybe we want to update some connection values. So in our, let's say, original example here for this DevOps test, all of these query pairs themselves are going against the data warehouse connection that we have. What we also have available in the system, if we take a look at the connections that we have in our environment here, is a system called DW upgrade. So let's say our data warehouse got upgraded and we need to test that the upgraded data warehouse is working. And maybe this happens on a regular basis and it's part of our data pipeline. Having to go in and update each of the different connections that we'll see on each of the query pairs may be cumbersome. There is a feature at the suite level where in the UI, you can come in here and do an override. So I can say, instead of pointing to the regular data warehouse target, let's point to the data warehouse upgrade. Or we can integrate that to get to that higher maturity level that we talked about in the beginning here as part of our pipeline. And in here, we have an example Jenkins instance that's going to have a mock pipeline. And what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and take a look at how we have that pipeline set up and what kind of looks like to be able to connect with and integrate QuerySurge with. So I have this DevOps sample here. I called it DW upgrade pipeline. You know, it's a good name, right?
It's an okay name.
Yeah. What would you? You would have probably named the Chris's pipeline.
That's correct. It would definitely be more successful.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, for sure. So let's take a look at our pipeline script. So in this case, we're using Jenkins, and Jenkins uses a version of Groovy, which is a Java-based script where you can write out your pipeline steps. So first step of the pipeline is going to be our database upgrade. We're not going to write that specific code, but we're going to imagine that that's what's happening. What we're interested in is the testing part of the pipeline. So we've set up some jobs here. And instead of using the curl command, we're using the Jenkins to make these API calls. And we're building out our headers, as you can see here. This is our authentication header to get our authentication token. And we're using a library called JSON Slurper to be able to bring in those JSON objects and parse them out. What I'm particularly interested in is that token, so that session ID that I can then pass along to the next calls I'll make in my pipeline. And for this call, we're taking a look at updating the connections, as I mentioned. So we have our target connection and our source connection IDs that we want to set. We have our description for our suite and our connection override behavior. So we're saying at this test suite level, we now want to point to our upgraded data warehouse. And then to the asset IDs, that's going to be a listing of our query pairs that are part of this test suite. And then should we call this DevOps, Chris's DevOps test?
I think that's a good idea.
And yeah, you know what? That looks pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and save that. Save that change. And why don't we kick off the pipeline?
Do it.
So
Do it.
this is just a small example, but you can imagine this may be part of an ongoing process that's happening daily, monthly, whatever time frame you may have. You can see Jenkins is taking us through the steps. If I wanted to get a look at what's going on behind the scenes in the console output, we can see all the calls that I've built in that Groovy script are being made. If I came over to our QuerySurge instance, we should see that the DevOps pipeline is running. It's running Chris's DevOps test as we have renamed it. And you can see it's about 70% complete. And what we are doing here is reporting the status back to Jenkins. So we're still running. We're making that status API call. once this wraps up, we'll get an overall result back into Jenkins.
So this is constantly
Yes.
pinging QuerySurge to get the current status.
Exactly. So we have a little loop going on here. We're making that scenario status call, the one that we showed earlier, on a regular basis to see what's going on. And we don't move on until we get a result. And here we can see that we've gotten that failed result back now. We can then move on to the next jobs in the pipeline. And we got a failure here. So we can then, based on our setup, we can then maybe do some rollback procedures in our pipeline, reverse the upgrade changes if necessary, or maybe just do something like notify the team that there was an issue. But the point is that the power of the API allows you all those and affords you all those different options to really customize your pipelines and get them working however you like.
Excellent. I like it.
Cool. So just to sort of recap, we come in here, we'll take a look at our results. Yeah, we have a failure.
This that status again. It keeps coming back.
Should get someone to fix that.
I know.
So QuerySurge is great, data validation and testing tool. I showed Jenkins here, but really any tool that can work with the RESTful API, you should be able to integrate with. If you have schedulers like Control-N or any other ETL tools out there, those are things that all can be integrated with QuerySurge. If you have a defect management or a test management solution that also has an API, the great thing about QuerySurge is that there is in QuerySurge the capability to set up webhooks. So sort of to complete and round out the DevOps workflow, I have here in QuerySurge set up a webhook to call into Jira and report in case we do have any failures. So in sticking with this Jenkins upgrade, if I log into my sample Jira project that I've created, you can see that just now, after that test is run, since we've gotten a failure, we've called that webhook and we've said, hey, let's create a defect because our QuerySurge test didn't pass. And now this is a single pipeline, a single streamlined event, but you can imagine in the complexities that we see in some of these setups, it could be very useful to have this sort of tracking capability to set those tests up in QuerySurge, integrate them with the pipeline, and then be able to report out into your various systems. And not only Jira, but really anything that can accept a webhook. So we come pre-configured with templates for Slack and Teams, also GitHub and GitLab in our latest release. And really any tool that can be set up with an API, you can certainly create. So you come in here, just click Add, select your provider as other, just type in the endpoint URL and the payload, and you're off and running. So really come a long way in the ability to provide those examples to be able to get that full integration. I think that's pretty useful, right, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the case of, we're talking about Walmart. So Walmart with the dates, we can feed in the dates for the last, 20 years. And every time there's a failure, we could automatically send a defect into Jira and notify the team.
Exactly. And assign the work out. And upon resolution, re-kick off the pipeline. And if you've done your work and have your mapping documents in order, you'll be able to easily identify in QuerySurge what mappings you'll need to retest. And that's very important. If you want to learn more about mappings, make sure you check out the project planning session that Chris and I did.
Absolutely.
Mappings, I would say, are the most important thing, especially when you're starting out a project. And, QuerySurge gives you the ability to identify and put in mappings on each of your query pairs. You can even access the mappings programmatically from the API. So if you're looking to pull down information, let's say from a query pair itself, that information comes across property-wise for query pairs, as well as the different asset tags like I talked about earlier that you may want to use. One of the final things I'll talk about, just to dive into some additional REST API calls here. what we see in the examples here is we're getting some high-level results back. We see that the overall scenario has failed. We do see that we're able to create a defect based on that failure. It's giving us these high-level metrics. Coming into the tool is where we can see those detailed views of which query pair has failed and which failures we may want to review. So one of the other things that you can do with the API is to be able to get that specific row-level results if you so choose. I know some of our customers like to build out customized dashboards, and the API is a great way to do that. So if I wanted to, let's say, get the status from this query pair, maybe a subset or an example of these statuses, there's a call in there to be able to do that. That's under the results call here, where you can come in, and we call this the row level results. So if I wanted to get the row level results for a query pair in a scenario, I can provide several different pieces to be able to do that. And what will happen is that the row level results will then come back in a JSON format, and then based on whatever setup I have, I can manipulate that data, display that data, report out on that data, all in a programmatic or automatic fashion. So, what do you think, Chris?
I think it's a lot of information. That's what I think. I think it's a good thing we offer training. Fundamentals ETL testing.
Yes.
We have a DevOps course and QuerySurge practitioner courses all on QuerySurge.com through our portal, and it's available to anyone that would like to take it.
Yeah, definitely recommend the training. Like I said, I know Eric sort of went through that, but it's definitely useful information up on there. And, I encourage everyone out there to, if you can, download a trial, maybe play with some of the base API stuff, or if you're an existing customer and you want to try out DevOps, definitely worth a look, especially if you're doing those different implementations across your systems.
And the best part about the training is you can get certificates that you can put on LinkedIn so that everybody else in the world can know.
That is
you are now certified.
That is a very good. How many certificates do you have? I thought you got them all. You got one?
Wait, I created them.
Yeah, I think you got them all.
Yeah, I got them all.
You got them all.
But I knew the answers all to the exam.
I'm sure that helps.
It does help when you created the question.
Of course. Again, like always, there's information on our website, QuerySurge.com. I think that pretty much does it for our DevOps overview. So I want to thank everyone for joining today. Thank you, Chris, for all your input. Some great names that you came up with today. And
anytime, Mike.
Thank you for watching. Again, if you're interested in learning anything more about QuerySurge, DevOps included, go to QuerySurge.com. And Joe, thank you for having us. It certainly was a pleasure. Definitely enjoyed it. And have a great day, everyone.